What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and with Marvel's G.O.D.S event coming out here in the next few months, I thought it'd be cool to make a series of videos explaining the multiverse in Marvel Comics. And in this video, we're going to explain what's called the Celestial Holy War and the birth of the first multiverse. Now, one thing that I do want to specify here at the outset is that each iteration of the multiverse is sentient, meaning it is a conscious living organism. We'll go more in depth into that as we get into the video that covers the histories of the different versions of the multiverse that have existed in Marvel Comics. But for the here and now, and as part of this discussion, all we really know is that at the beginning of everything, there was what's called the first firmament, also known as the first cosmos or the first universe. You will see those terms used interchangeably in Marvel Comics, but while we don't know exactly who created it, we can largely assume it was the one above all. But again, we're not given a definitive answer. Now, all this is covered in Al Ewing's Ultimates, and what he tells us is that when the first firmament came into existence, it was both lonely, but also full of arrogance because of how much power it had. And what it did is it created a group of beings called the aspirants, not aspirins, aspirants. And so these things, these organisms were astronomically powerful in terms of what they could do. So much so that they started traveling around the first firmament and they started creating galaxies and solar systems and stars, planets, life, different things like that. Now, what would happen is that every time the aspirants created anything, they would present it to the first firmament and seek its approval. If the first firmament was satisfied, they would be allowed to continue on with their creation. If the first firmament was dissatisfied, they would destroy their creation and they would start over again. Now, the whole kicker behind all this is that these things that were created would effectively live for eternity. So if we assume, for example, they created Earth and they put human beings on Earth, they would only put a finite number of human beings, say maybe 1 billion, and those 1 billion humans would live forever. Not only that, they would live unchanging. I mean, they would never age, they would never die, none of that stuff, right? They would stay stagnant for all eternity. Now, this whole thing also extended to like galaxies and stars and so on. They would be in that shape perpetually forever. The problem with this is that some aspirants believed that was a problem, that life should experience growth, change, mortality, and even death. So galaxies should die, stars should die, planets should die, and so too should sentient life. And even the first universe itself should die and then eventually be reborn into something else. And so because they held this differing ideology, they effectively split off from the aspirants and started creating life and things of their own design without seeking the first firmament's approval. What they also did is they changed their physical form. Instead of being monochrome, which is to say black and white in this instance, they made themselves multicolored. Then they changed their names and started calling themselves Celestials. So that's where you get Celestials from in Marvel Comics. Pretty cool origin story, huh? Now, the thing behind this is that because they were considered heretics by the first firmament, what ended up happening here is the first firmament itself branded them as traitors, and a war broke out between the aspirants and the Celestials. Now, something to grasp here is this is like a giant civil war among beings, each one of which is as powerful as the Celestial. So imagine a war among beings that's capable of creating entire galaxies and solar systems. You can imagine how astronomically dangerous that kind of war would be. And the consequence of it is exactly what you would think it would be. We don't definitively know exactly how it played out. The only information that we really get is that this war was prolonged for a lengthy period of time. There was really kind of a stalemate going on, but the Celestials had developed something called the God Killer armor. Now, that was actually introduced in Kieran Gillen's run on Iron Man and a story called The Secret Origin of Tony Stark. It's really, really cool. But the thing about this is that while the Celestials were creating the God Killer armor, the aspirants, for reasons that were never explained to us, fell into a state of civil war. And so what that did is it decreased their numbers by a pretty huge margin. Again, we're not given any definitive numbers here, but we're told that like it basically shrinked their ranks by a pretty good chunk. And so in the fallout of this civil war, and with the aspirants already weakened, the Celestials fired off their God Killer armor and basically shattered the first firmament into an infinite number of pieces. And that gave us the first multiverse. Now, one of the things that did happen here, which we're not really going to go into a whole lot of detail about, is that the first firmament, the essence of it, along with the aspirants, took off to a place called the Far Shore. Now, the reason why we're not going to talk about that too much, and we can kind of talk about the Far Shore here, that's because the Far Shore is not really part of the multiverse per se. It's really beyond the multiverse and anything that could be considered the multiverse. The Far Shore is largely presumed to be the realm of the one above all. That's where really godly beings or cosmic entities go to die. Now, there is also the God Quarry, and we'll talk about that in a future video as well, but the Far Shore is a pretty cool concept. It's a pretty cool idea. You don't see it often in Marvel Comics, but it is cool when it does appear. Having said that, with the first multiverse being created from the pieces of the first universe's physical form, the Celestials in turn did two things. The first thing they did is they created what were called the Omegas. Now, that's the name that was originally given to them in Marvel Comics, and more recently in Al Ewing's Defenders Beyond, that name was changed, and we'll talk about what that is here in a second. But the Omegas were charged with basically ensuring that a war never broke out between the Celestials again, and that if a war like that happened, the Omegas would have enough power to eradicate all Celestials involved, blink out and wipe out all of creation, and then effectively start over again. And so what this did is it led to the Omegas being placed by the Celestials in a location that's technically outside the multiverse, but basically monitors the multiverse from the outside. They, of course, ended up becoming the Beyonders, and they are basically in what's called the Beyond Verse. Now again, Al Ewing changed all that stuff from the way it was originally done. Now that, of course, was again covered in Al Ewing's Defenders Beyond, and we're better for it, because prior to that story, we never really got any meaningful explanation about the Beyondverse or the Beyonders or where they came from. So it's a pretty cool little tidbit there. The second thing the Celestials did is they duplicated themselves as an infinite number and placed a different version of themselves throughout the multiverse. That's why every universe has a version of a Celestial like Arishem the Judge, right? Or the Collector, or the Gardener, or something along those lines. Now, having said all of that, if you guys want to understand or get caught up on Al Ewing's Ultimates and Defenders Beyond, make sure you guys click the link to this playlist. You guys are gonna absolutely love that story. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.